What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown and this is Heresy Financial. Many of you have asked me many times for my opinions on oil, and so I figured it was probably time to finally make a video about oil, energy usage specifically, and why I am very bullish on oil going forward for the next 5, potentially up to even 10 years. Ready? Let's dive in. As with anything, the future value of something is going to be dependent on the same thing that its current value is dependent on, which is supply and demand. So we're going to take a look at both of those today. We're going to look at the supply side and the demand side of oil going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. So first, let's look at demand. The number one thing that we have to do is we have to look globally, because many of us live in Western countries where the energy usage has already kind of peaked out. If you take a look at this chart put together by Lynn Alden, and I'll have her article on this linked in the description below, you can see that the oil usage per capita, per person in the USA is about twice what it is in Japan, about 3 times what it is in Thailand, about 6 times what it is in China, and about 15 times what it is in India. This is vital to understand when looking at oil demand, because oil demand is global. And while countries like the United States might have already peaked in terms of how much oil we use per person for our energy needs, and we might, even if it's by law, we might be transitioning some of that oil usage to other sources of energy like solar and wind, there are billions of people across the planet in countries that have not gone through the growth and development that places like the United States have yet, and they are only going to be using more energy going into the future, not less. Now you think, but wait, you said more energy. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be getting their energy from oil, but not so fast. If you look at the energy density of some of the newer forms of energy production like wind and solar, they are nowhere near energy dense enough to supply the energy needs of a growing population, a growing economy in places like India. Further than that, any time throughout history when we have had a new form of energy come into play, it has not replaced the old forms of energy. So for example, when we started using wood for energy instead of just using human energy, there was a big leap forward in terms of the capabilities and the labor and the advancements that the human race could go through. If you want a fantastic book about this, I highly recommend Energy and Civilization by Václav Smil. But essentially, every time we've moved forward in gaining a new energy source, there has been a massive leap forward in terms of technology and progress. So it started off with using wood for fire, and then we started using coal, and then fossil fuels, and then now many people are saying wind and solar are kind of that next. I disagree. I think it's nuclear. That's another video. But many people are saying, hey, we're going to start having wind and solar or other forms of energy start to replace these older forms of energy that are worse. Now, this is true in terms of percentages. So right now, most of the world's energy comes from oil, right? And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be coal. And so oil has replaced coal in terms of the dominant source of energy for our world. But if you look at total amounts of energy used, for the most part, total energy usage of every type of energy source only goes up over time. What this shows is that every time we gain a giant leap forward as the human race, finding a new source of energy, all we do is we add that onto our existing capacity. We still use all the coal we used to, plus more. We still use all the oil we used to, plus more. And now this abundant new source of energy, all we do is we use a lot more energy than we used to, and we use that to propel the human race forward. This means that barring any absolutely cataclysmic, world-changing events, the future is likely to be just as the past was, where any new forms of energy get added on top of what we already use, and what we already use in absolute terms still grows over time. And the last thing I'd like to note regarding the demand side of oil is that oil is not just used for energy. In fact, virtually every single physical item that you use or touch or consume on a daily basis has been produced by or produced with or transported by oil in some way. Regardless of how you feel about that, whether that's right or wrong, good or bad, whether we should be doing more of that or less of that, that's not the point here. The point here is that for virtually everybody on Earth, virtually everything that we use is a byproduct of oil in some capacity. And the fact that it's so ingrained globally means that the likelihood that that changes or significantly decreases in any manner over the next 5 to 10 years, which is a very short time frame in the terms of how long it takes for these systems to develop and become very set in stone, in my opinion, it's worth taking the other side of that bet. Okay, so that's the demand side of it, and obviously there are other factors, but I wanted to keep this video short enough so that you'd be able to watch all the way through to the end. So you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, well, those demand factors have existed for a long time. In fact, they might have only grown over the last, let's say, 10 years. So how come the price of oil has ever been able to fall if demand is so strong? That's where we get to the supply side, because despite the demand, if you have the ability to create way more oil than you need, the price is obviously going to fall. Oil supply generally comes from one of two sources, which is long cycle production and short cycle production. Now, due to a number of factors, long cycle production has been without significant new investment for about 6 to 7 years now. And long cycle production takes about 4 to 7 years from the start of a project to the production of new oil, which means that right about now is when we're kind of running out of all of the excess oil that was created by those long cycle projects that were started, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And short cycle production was really hit hard in about 2014, 2015, back when everybody was drilling so much, flooding the market with oil. They got hammered, they got hurt, and so for the last couple of years, they've really been focusing more on improving their balance sheets, improving their cash flow, and haven't been plowing any money into new projects. This has led to a dynamic where from the supply side, the global reserves of oil are being quickly depleted. And yes, long term, that can change. But we have to remember these things can't just be flipped on and off like a light switch. They take years to get ramped back up again. And so right now, it seems like we're experiencing this perfect storm where number one, demand is still only growing, and it looks like places, especially like India, are only going to be ramping up their energy needs, especially over the short-term future, rather than the opposite. Second, we're seeing supply globally right now hit a point where very soon we're going to be extremely low on reserves, and any projects that are going to contribute to new supply are years away. And then finally, the prices of a lot of assets that are dependent on the price of oil have been hurt so hard over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, simply because investors have been so burned by investing into these projects, investing into these assets, and then watching the price of oil just collapse, that many of these assets are underpriced right now, considering what I believe to be the future of the supply and the demand. So from everything I can tell, the next 5 to 10 years are going to be absolutely phenomenal for anybody who invests in oil. And take all of this with a grain of salt. I've got some skin in the game here. I am long oil. And my time frame on this is the next 5, potentially up to the next 10 years, because we're looking at demand growing and supply falling off of a cliff, but that doesn't last forever. At some point, prices get high enough that incentivizes new production. It just so happens that it takes a little bit of time for that to come into play. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.